Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, February 6th, 2026, and our dear friends, Colonel Wilkerson and Larry Johnson, are here with us. This is the last podcast from Iran, and because I'm leaving Iran, let me start with the case of the negotiations. And we know that the second round of negotiations have been concluded. And here is what the foreign minister of Iran has said so far. The main issue, it seems that the whole atmosphere of the negotiations were somehow positive. They haven't decided about the next round, the date and the place, the location of the next round of negotiations. But what was mentioned by the Iranian foreign minister, that is the massive distrust between the two parties before even starting the negotiations. And let me start, Larry, with you. What is your understanding on what has happened so far?
Well, they're not shooting at. The United States has not launched its attack yet. We'll see. Um, the I think the most important development over the course of the week was the U.S. attempt to bully Iran back into saying, "Okay, you got to give up ballistic missiles, and you got to stop support for the other Shia groups in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah." And they said, if not, there will be no talks. And Iran said, okay, no talks. And then, according to Axios, the U.S. officials were surprised. I'm thinking, what a bunch of dummies. The fact that they were, quote, surprised by that, that would have been an easy prediction. So, look, I think there is a deal there to be made. The deal would be Iran would say, okay, let's set up an inspection process, procedure, so you, the West, can be assured that we don't have nuclear weapons. And the enrichment, right now, Iran's saying, it's all going to stay here local. They could be persuaded, I think, by Russia and China to let them take some of the, the stuff that's 60% and above and handle that. But this is not about nuclear weapons or uranium enrichment. This is all about regime change. The West does not give a damn in reality, that thinking it has to eliminate the non-existent nuclear threat. This is about getting rid of the Islamic Republic, exterminating it. That's what this is about. And so I think Arachi's correct. Okay, we had a good meeting, but I still don't trust the bastards. That's what he's saying. And I agree with him.
Oh,
Well, the last time, of course, they might not have been said to trust us, but at least they went along with what we wanted to do, and look what it got them. So I agree with Larry. I wouldn't trust us any further than I could spit, and maybe not even that far.
Yeah.
That said, I do think that Trump is not interested ultimately in launching this armada. And I could detail you a whole many reasons for that, prominent amongst which is there are still some sane people in the Pentagon. And that sanity made it up through Kane all the way to Hegseth. And I don't know that Hegseth presented it, but under the new rules, the new law, Goldwater-Nichols, the chairman can make his own statement. So as I understand it, that actually got across. So there's some trepidation about starting a war with Iran, as well there should be. I also understand that the IDF has had some outspoken people who also vouchsafe their real opinion about what it would be like for Israel were Iran to just let loose on them. And that's been an impediment, not so much Netanyahu himself, but he's got to pay attention to the leaders he's got left in the IDF. And then I also think that what Trump is after, ultimately, is the return to the JCPOA plus, if you will. And that he's going to tout as another war stopped, another achievement on his part, and get on to being chairman of the Gaza Peace Group, the new United Nations. I don't think he wants a war, in other words. I think he would rather have something else. But he wants it to look dynamic, forced, that the Armada was successful in coercing them into whatever he will pronounce. Remember, Donald Trump doesn't deal with reality. He describes reality for you and for his audience. And he'll describe this as a complete and utter success and achieved by him, and certainly by his use of the Armada to put pressure on Iran. So there's a lot more to it than that, but I think that's where we are now. I hope that's where we are, really.
Yeah, the disconnect with this, I call it the so-called Armada. So as you recall, during Operation Rough Rider, and I think that was named after Lindsey Graham's fantasy cowboy, but the one in March in the Red Sea, at one point we had 2 aircraft carriers there, we had 4 destroyers and 1 cruiser. Now this current mighty Armada is 1 aircraft carrier, 3 destroyers. That's it. So we're actually, and the ultimate irony is they keep pushing. My understanding is they're keeping that the naval force about 1,000 miles offshore, except the destroyers, half of the VLS cells, those vertical launch system cells, are loaded with Tomahawk missiles. But the Tomahawk missile can only travel 1,000 miles. So basically, we're well armed and equipped to blow the hell out of the southern beaches of Iran. I mean, it's, yeah, I'm saying, what are they thinking? And then, they've been, we've got this Russian and Chinese naval flotilla warships that are en route to the area. Oh, this is pre-planned. This is not new, but they're scheduled to conduct their joint annual military exercise, naval exercise, somewhere, I've heard anywhere from mid-February to the 1st of March. Normally it's the 1st of March, but for whatever reason, they're accelerating. So once you get Chinese and Russian warships in the region, and there's already a Chinese spy ship tailing the Abraham Lincoln. So again, I'm with Larry, hoping that we're not foolish enough to try to pull the trigger, because we're going to get a bloody nose. I would predict that we'd lose at least 1 ship or more, and that every U.S. military installation in the region will be decimated.
And Nima, I'll just add to that. Most of your listeners probably are too young. Remember the 1,000 nautical mile line. OPLAN 5001 in the Pacific, in particular, paid attention to that line. And at that time, we could sortie 8, 9 carriers against that line. But no skipper, no fleet commander, if you will, would cross that 1,000-mile line without the president's personal execute order, because they all knew that the combination of air, sea skimming surface, and subsurface was going to sink 1 or 2 aircraft carriers the moment they crossed that line. Now, technology has changed majorly since then, but it's changed on both sides. Both sides. And I will tell you that as a graduate of the Naval War College, and having written my thesis on subs in direct support of the carrier battle group, which is what we called them at the time, I know a little bit about this. This technology on the kill the carrier side has progressed a lot further than the carrier's defenses. Subsurface, surface, and air have advanced. So one of the things someone probably whispered in Trump's ear was, we might lose a carrier. Damn thing to start. Damn thing. An example to start. Donald, the first American president to lose 5,000 souls in one sweep.
Larry, what do we know about this staff, these people who are working, for example, on the aircraft carrier? It's 5,000 people, if I'm not mistaken. They're involved for the, for all the.
Oh yeah, it's a small city, but what I found fascinating is, so a week ago, just about a week ago, the Iranians flew out their version of the MQ-9 Predator drone. That's the Shahed 149, and it's capable of both intelligence, reconnaissance collection, as well as firing something along the lines of a Hellfire missile. And it overflew the Abraham Lincoln, and Abraham Lincoln didn't do anything to challenge it, which was fascinating. And we know that because the video footage was then shown on Iranian TV on the 30th, January 30th. So 2 days ago, then, the Abraham F-18 fighter off of the carrier shot down, I think it's a Shahed 136, or anyway, it's the one that looks like the triangle. It's not like the MQ-9, so it's a smaller drone. It's one that would be more capable of carrying out a suicide attack. Now, that's the story. They're saying they shot it down. We've seen no reaction from Iran, and frankly, I'd be surprised that they would fly that kind of drone out there unless they were just wanting to test to see what the U.S. would do. So this entire, I call it the fantasy battle plan of the neocon and Zionists. They didn't pay attention to what the U.S. failed to do against the Houthis last March, where they actually had a clear objective. One, establish freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. That was a stated clear objective, and the U.S. Navy, with all of its mighty power, with 2 aircraft carriers, failed to carry that out. We've never in modern history, we've never seen an instance where the United States could create regime change simply by dropping bombs from an airplane or a bunch of airplanes. I mean, we had, again, go back to Iraq in 2003. We had complete air superiority, air supremacy. And boy, we, bombed the hell out of the Iraqis. And we still had to send in Delta Force to go rouse Saddam out of a hole in the ground. That was the only way we got regime change, by putting troops on the ground. We're not going to do that to Iran. So we're relying upon air power and frankly, a naval capability that, in my judgment, just as, that transition from the 19th into the 20th century, where the 19th century, man, horse cavalry was essential. It was a powerful military resource. But with the advent of the tank and the advent of the machine gun, horse cavalry was no longer, it was outdated. And these aircraft carriers, as long as they didn't face hypersonic missiles or missiles that could be guided missiles that could be launched, they were a pretty powerful force. But no longer, as we're seeing right now. They've got to stay. The weaponry we've got that we can equip them with, the Tomahawk cruise missile, is got to be, it's on the ships, but can't really be used because they have to stay far enough offshore so they don't get sunk. I mean, this is a twisted, sick drama. It's like the theater of the absurd.
Nima, let me point out that they call them strike groups now. They did call them carrier battle groups. If you're in the Red Sea, you can't deploy your defenses, not the way you would in the open ocean. Your subsurface, your surface, and your air defenses are constrained. Plus, the carrier can barely even turn around in the Red Sea. So that was a real problem for the Navy, and the Navy walked right into it. I would have expected to see somebody relieved for that. I didn't, because we haven't relieved anybody for losing big wars even in the last 20 years.
They get promoted.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different in the Indian Ocean or the North Arabian Sea, even because you got room to maneuver, you got subs underneath, you got aircraft above, you got missilery and so forth. But basically, Larry's right. You're going to lose one of these carriers. There's no question about it. And I'd be surprised to see the carrier get inside 1,000 nautical miles, or maybe a little bit more than that. But it would be extremely dangerous if Iran does have the missiles that I'm told that they have, and the capabilities that those missiles have. And we're not even mentioning Russia and China. And then the other thing about it is we just don't have the kind of firepower we need for any of this. And let me take you back to the Iraq War in 2003. Rumsfeld wanted to do it with 54,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. 54,000. He wanted to defeat Powell's idea of maximum force. He wanted to show that with modern technology and Donald Rumsfeld's brain, we could do a lot better. Well, the battle took place between Tommy Franks and Donald Rumsfeld, with Powell weighing in occasionally till he was told to get out of it by Cheney because he wasn't the chairman anymore. He didn't get out of it. They argued to the point where they got about 165,000 with about 20,000 offshore until the others had won the war for Donald. And they were all going to get out of there in 6 to 8 months, a year at the longest. Well, look what happened.
Yeah.
And Ken Shinseki was low on his estimate, I think, when he said 200 to 250,000 or so and got fired for it. You really were looking at the need for 500 to 600,000 soldiers and Marines on the ground in Iraq to do the things we did not do, to round up the 35 different huge arms depots and dispose of those arms in a safe way, to get after Saddam immediately, to get after Al-Qaeda elements immediately, to neutralize the Republican Guard immediately or near immediately. All of that, you needed all this. Nema, we couldn't even put that many soldiers together to put on the ground today. So what is the threat really, other than, as Larry said, this group of ships and others around acting like they're going to do something? What they're going to do, if they do anything militarily, is bomb the bejesus out of Iran, which won't do anything except make them angry.
Yeah, in fact, the real irony here, and actually, I did an interview. I interviewed Professor Morandi, and Professor Nema yesterday, or I should say Al-Khurshid, but we'll go with first name. And they both pointed out that there is a growing sentiment in Iran among the people to have a nuke. That actually the Ayatollah Khamenei, he's in a minority right now. And I think one of the ironic consequences of a U.S. attack, if it comes, will be it will finally convince even the Ayatollah that Iran must have a nuclear weapon, because it's only those countries with nuclear weapons that are left alone.
You may have heard. I think it was on the Judge's show yesterday. We talked about this CIA guy who has said that Saudi Arabia has a nuclear weapon or two.
Well, they do it. That's Dewey Claridge. I knew Dewey.
And my response to that was quite simple. Mohammed bin Salman went to Islamabad a couple of years ago with a $20 billion check. That was the installment, in my view. When we were doing the AQCon network, we were quite confident that were certain countries in the Islamic world to ask Islamabad for a nuclear weapon, they would get it, and they would get it fairly swiftly. So that's another element one factor into this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Larry, when you look at the team, the American team, we had Steve Witkoff together with Jared Kushner for the first time, and then the commander of CENTCOM. Bean, what does that mean to you, in your opinion?
Well, you still, Witkoff is the president's personal representative. The fact that they brought the head of CENTCOM in now is a sign that, they're going to have him there to talk about what the U.S. sees as the military threat from Iran. It is, frankly, having he's the wrong. I would say the head of CENTCOM's the wrong guy to have there. What you want is if you're serious about saying we want to make sure that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, that they're not processing fissile material to create a nuclear warhead, you want somebody from the Department of Energy that's skilled with, or that section. I'm not even sure it exists anymore. The weapons inspectors to insist on what we would need to, the kinds of assurances we'd need in order to know that Iran was, quote, not building a nuclear weapon. So this, Witkoff, along with Jared Kushner, I think Kushner was there as well. It's just, it's a meeting of the Chabad house. This is, if you ask them where their loyalties lie, is it the United States or Israel? I think they both have a tough time answering, because the kowtowing to Israel is still a very important part of what's driving Trump. You go back and look at, people have overlooked let's call it the Jewish mafia influence over Donald Trump. He was friends, early on with Roy Cohn, and Cohn was one of the leaders. He worked for Senator Joseph McCarthy, as I recall. Also worked alongside Robert F. Kennedy. But Roy Cohn was he was in, let's call it, the early form of the deep state, and Trump's association with Epstein has continued. So this what I'm saying is, this relationship with the whole Zionist enterprise, it's not incidental, it's not peripheral, it's central to this. And that I think is another thing that is driving Trump.
I just add, I think Larry's right. And one thing that really worries me here and makes me not quite as sanguine as I would be otherwise, full attack on Iran, its pressure, is the Epstein affair, because it's just getting new momentum every day, whether it's Melania, whether it's the president himself, or some of the president's cronies. And what better way to take attention off of it instantly than to start a massive war?
Yeah, and in regards to that, just one of the revelations came out yesterday that I didn't know, but it turns out there's a photograph out of the files of Melania hanging out with Ghislaine Maxwell before she married Donald Trump. And it was reported that it was Epstein that introduced Melania to Donald Trump. Now, some have speculated, was she part of the Epstein sex activities? I doubt it, because she was too old. She was, if she was 15 or 16, yeah, she would have been a prime candidate. But she was, she was 21, 22. That was, too old for Jeffrey and this gang of perverts that are being exposed around the world. But still, this relationship that Trump had with Epstein was deep. It wasn't peripheral. It wasn't incidental. They weren't just like members of a country club and they saw each other in the locker rooms, when they're playing golf on the weekend. No. And Trump has gone to great lengths to try to cover that up. And that's getting exposed, because really what they're exposing is how the Zionists, using Mossad, were involved with this massive campaign to blackmail and really control others. And the fact that it is now confirmed that Epstein, he was working for the Rothschilds. I mean, and people start, trotting out all these conspiracies surrounding the Rothschilds, but there is no doubt they have been one of the most destructive families in history in terms of promoting war, chaos, and involvement as well with degenerate sexual activities. I mean, this is some sick stuff that's coming out. And Trump is doing his best to play the actor Leslie Nielsen and was a police story. Nothing to see here. Move along.
Yeah, it's astonishing how many rich people, influential, powerful people Epstein knew and worked with and worked on. Really astonishing. Starmer yesterday in Prime Minister's Question Time was hard pressed by members who just simply stood up and said, "You know who you sent to America as our ambassador?" I mean, he's in there. Is there anyone who isn't in there? Is the question I've been asking myself, who's moneyed and influential and powerful to a certain extent. Is there anyone who isn't in there?
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the tweet of Benjamin Netanyahu talking about Jeffrey Epstein. He says Jeffrey Epstein's unusual close relationship with Ehud Barak doesn't suggest Epstein worked for Israel. It proves the opposite. You know, he's talking about that Ehud Barak was connected with the left, you know, with the anti-Zionists, with the left in the United States. They were trying to do everything to destroy Israel and making some sort of case. It's amazing, you know, what he's trying to do. It reminds me of Charlie Kirk's.
A lot of these people weren't, as they say, you know, having Epstein work for them. They were working for Epstein.
Yeah. Now, look, let's agree. Let's get to the bottom line of it. This was Vladimir Putin's plot. This is all Putin's fault.
He's probably the only world leader not involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not only is this a club he wasn't invited to join, it's a club he wouldn't be a member of.
I don't think Xi Jinping was there either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only reason that we know that Epstein is the agent of the Russian government, it was the agent of Vladimir Putin, because of the British media. They discovered that in a very sophisticated manner.
Oh my God! Yeah, look, they're desperate to try to get the spotlight put on Russia somehow, some way, but it's just the exposing. Again, these are not incidental contacts. These are all very wealthy, influential people, and again, it'd be one thing to just because they knew each other, that's not criminal, but Epstein was engaged with procuring underage girls who were involved in sexual activities, and some of the photographs that are coming out it shows how much what a collection of liars that the Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel are. They are despicable, what the cover-up that they're engaged in. But one of the reasons, and you've watched, as those files came out, Donald Trump's name appeared like 1,800 times, and they keep editing it down, trying to remove his name or black it out. It's just, again, it's a cover-up.
Nima, if you read Xi Jinping's most recent statement, which is the third, I think, in the series, that picks up on what Deng Xiaoping started and what now Xi Jinping is the instrument to complete, it's really stunning. I passed it by Chaz Freeman the other day to make sure that I wasn't reading it awkwardly or incorrectly, because it is stunning. One of the things he says in there is, we are going to make the renminbi a global reserve currency. That is a huge change. And then he goes on to say they're already, he says, number 2 in the world. He says that. Then he says, we're a capitalistic, industrial, and economic power, second to none. The way to get to the top is to develop a financial system. And then that reserve currency for the renminbi is part of that. But the language he uses, and I don't speak Mandarin, so I'm taking the translation, but as I said, I passed it by Ambassador Freeman. The language he uses to describe the social and financial system of the West is damning. And he goes to great lengths to say, we will not do this. We will not emulate the West. We will not make a financial system like theirs. Theirs is majorly flawed. And some of this has got to be coming out of the Epstein scandal. It's got to be coming out of what we've done with our financial system in terms of sanctions and in terms of this kind of perfidy. It's a powerful statement and not to be expected at this particular juncture, and yet there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Larry,
Yeah,
we know from. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the world described by Friedrich Nietzsche, and with respect to the consequences or the rise of nihilism, we're witnessing it. I mean, it's happening in front of us.
Yeah. It seems that one of the demands on the part of Americans, it's not the core, but of course, on the margins. Al Jazeera reported, Larry, last night here, that the United States is trying to ask, they're demanding Iranians not to export Iranian oil or to limit the export of Iranian oil to China. How is that? It's all. I would say that would never happen. And why do you need to go in that direction if the main issue is the nuclear program of Iran?
And this is to follow up on Colonel Wilkerson's comment. On February 4th, so that 2 days ago, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin had an hour and 25-minute video conference call. And both governments provided a readout, but the key conclusion from that is they're both solidly committed to playing the dominant role in the world in terms of maintaining security and really helping create, as Colonel Wilkerson noted, a new financial order. They talked specifically about Iran. They didn't get into the details, but I guarantee you those details were, okay, how are we going to, if the United States attacks Iran, how are we going to respond? What are we going to do? What measures are we prepared to take? Because they've taken extensive steps up to this point to provide air defense systems, to bolster the intelligence capabilities of Iran, as well as providing friendly advice on how not to get sucked into a trap. So, but this construction of this new economic infrastructure, one of the elements, the new elements that China's created is called CIPS, CIPS, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. It is a digital competitor to SWIFT. In fact, I can't even call it a competitor because it runs circles around SWIFT. All SWIFT is it's an analog system. What I mean by that is I send an email to you. If you're a bank, Nima, and Colonel Wilkerson's a bank, and I'm wanting to ultimately transfer money to Colonel Wilkerson, but I have to go through you as an intermediate bank. I send you an email, and then you send the email on to Wilkerson. And there is this thing called spam. So sometimes those emails get lost in spam, and instead of a transaction taking place in 1 day, sometimes it takes 3 days. Well, here's China with its CIPS. It's literally digital, just like, I send money to you over the phone through a system like Zelle or Venmo, and the money immediately hits your bank account. So already China and Russia are moving in this direction. And the United States is, we're busy setting up what I call gold-plated buggy whip shops. We dress them up really expensively and think, man, there'll be a real demand for this. And we don't realize technology has moved on. So, but the reason China and Russia were talking on the 4th is because Putin was also telling Xi, I'm having a conversation later today with Donald Trump. So I want you to know what we're going to talk about. And he's coordinating and just in order to shore up the confidence in the Chinese that Russia isn't running its own side game. And then it was it was after that. Oh, actually, it was yeah. So they both Putin and Xi at one point they had conversations with Trump, and it was Xi that actually had the conversation on the 4th, and he was very, very blunt with Trump. Hey, Taiwan is part of China. That's not going to change. Now Trump came out and tried his best to put lipstick on the pig, but Xi was not backing down at all in terms of what China's interests were. But again, the point of this is China and Russia are coordinating very closely, and that's the very thing that the United States 10 years ago said it wanted to avoid, and now we've created the very thing we claimed that we didn't want to exist.
Yeah. And as far as the oil goes, Nima, there is probably more oil in the western desert of Iraq, which has not been adequately explored. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Multinationals don't like to come in there even now because it's not settled and the oil ministry is not competent in their view in terms of exploring that western desert. There is also more oil under the Caspian Sea than is in Venezuela, or for that matter, probably anywhere else in the world. Waiting way back there, the Rothschilds and others had their little bite at it initially, but it's still there. It's waiting. Russia and China have the greatest claim to that in terms of development and pipelines that are going to pump it and so forth. So I'm sure these conversations have included how they are going to get away from the greatest oil power in the world right now because of fracking and leave it in the dust. And they're going to do that. There's no question in my mind they're going to do that. And they're so far ahead of us in that technology too now, and getting even further, that it's not going to be that much of a feat for them. So when that happens, and that oil is delineated in renminbi rather than US dollars, guess what's going to happen to the other people in the world who still have a little oil? And I include the Saudis in that because they are running out. Not because they don't have some left in the ground, but because the geological structures that oil is in collapse when you take it out because it's the last remnants of the oil in that particular structure. So they're not about to run out, but they are not going to be the oil power that they have been in the past. And take a look at OPEC right now. When's the last time you heard anything about OPEC? You haven't heard anything about it because their power is dwindling away in the face of these other developments. When it costs a Permian Basin guy $50 to get a barrel of oil out of the ground, and it costs somebody else $10 to $12 to get it out of the ground, guess who's going to win that battle? Watch us try to drive the oil prices up as soon as Trump gets a feeling on the midterms and thinks the American taxpayer won't be, too much of a problem because oil is, $100 a barrel, $150 a barrel, and at the pump, gas is $4 or $5 again. They're just waiting for that because we won't be able to offset it given what these other guys who are more savvy than us are doing. And the multinationals are watching this very, very closely and shifting their flags accordingly too, or at least planning to.
Larry, what's so amazing about what Colonel just said is that he's talking about the capacity of Saudi Arabia as time goes by is to provide oil and gas to the market. But we know that the German Chancellor Merz was he went to Saudi Arabia talking about he wants to replace, Russia with Saudi Arabia. It's somehow amazing to me that these people, what's going on in the mind of these people after all the difficulty is somehow delusional when you look at the reality.
Yeah, how are they going to get that oil from Saudi Arabia to Germany? Just as an example. So it's going to be more expensive simply because if it comes out of Saudis, they're going to either have to sell it up through the Red Sea, then through the Suez Canal, then through the Med, then up into the North Atlantic to get into Hamburg. So that's a pretty long journey, and as opposed to Russia was able to just pump it through pipelines into Germany at one point. or at least make it much easier to deliver the oil. So, these the European Union is in the process. They're committing suicide. They're committing economic suicide because they are, instead of trying to get products, essential items for the lowest price possible, they're paying the highest price possible. And in the process, they're going into great debt. And their economies are all slowing. So it's just this disconnect with reality. I've never in observing politics, with some interest over the last 50 years, I've never seen anything like this. Such a divorce from reality. It's really astonishing.
Yeah. Carl, Larry mentioned that China, part of the discussion between China and Russia is about what's going on in Iran, what's going on with the case of Iran in the West Asia. In your opinion, do you think if something happens, let's assume, we know that nobody can, here in Iran, nobody believes what Donald Trump is talking about. I would say that. Everything. And many people are arguing what there is no point of negotiating with the United States. We know that eventually we have to fight the United States. That's what's going on in the mind of the people here, public opinion and the decision makers, those people, military decision maker or intelligence. But how do you see the whole case in the mind of Russia and China, and to what extent they would, somehow collaborate with Iran, or somehow come to the conflict, or somehow be involved with the conflict?
First of all, let me say that your comment about they're not really believing Donald Trump, is there a world leader today that believes Donald Trump?
Yeah.
They may have to act like they do on specific occasions and on particular issues, but I dare say there's not a single one. Most of them would probably think their prayers had been answered if he died of a heart attack tomorrow morning. I don't know that J.D. Vance would be that much better, but at least he probably would be a better person for a while until they learn things about him. When you come down to what's happening right now, I think one of the reasons Putin, I wasn't a listener to the telephone call, but had I been, I think I would have heard some comments about this. Putin is tied down in Ukraine right now. He has major forces, one could say the major ability of Russia with its military to influence other events, tied down in Ukraine. He's becoming increasingly concerned about Southwest Asia. After all, if you look at a map, it's not very far from Russia. It's always been a concern from Stalin forward, actually all the way from Catherine forward. So he would like to get out of the special military operation as rapidly as he can, because he is tied down and he might need that military at least for deterrence, or perhaps even to do something in another region. He has a pact with Iran, as a matter of fact, as you well know. So what do? You have two choices with regard to Ukraine. You tell Witkoff and Kushner to take a hike, or you at least kind of indicate that while you keep the talks going, and you go on and move on Odessa or whatever, and you keep moving in Ukraine to virtually destroy everything that's left. Go to the Curzon line, if you will. Some real concern in Poland right now about that prospect amongst people who really watch the situation closely. Or conclude these negotiations on the best terms possible and free himself and have a little bit more flexibility with his deterrent, his military. I don't know where he's going in that regard. I wouldn't even pretend to know, but I do think that that is a major consideration for him right now. He's in a conflict that's important to him, but he's won that for all intents and purposes, and he's in talks now that are bogging him down, and he needs that military for other reasons and in other places. All to say that I think the dynamics are changing to a point where, and let me hasten to add, This administration has zero comprehension of that, to a point where Europe is becoming increasingly inconsequential to the scene in the world in any respect. And the EU is reflecting that by reacting the way a non-democratic and autocratic entity as it is would react: stupidly, idiotically, moronically, trying to preserve its prerogatives, and it's not going to do that. So Europe's falling apart, NATO's falling apart, and Putin's watching all this. Maybe that was his prime objective. Some have asserted that one of his objectives with this SMO was in part and parcel with a bigger strategic objective to destroy NATO, to clean house in Europe, to break the transatlantic link and so forth. I wouldn't doubt that for a moment. However, I think we're bogged down in this process right now, and Iran is complicating it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens if, one, we do use military force in Southwest Asia, and I predict complete disaster if we do. And I think Trump is aware of that, at least viscerally, if not intellectually. And second, if we don't, where it goes from there, because that isn't going to settle any of this, other than it's not going to, lead to a bigger war or perhaps even a nuclear attack. We aren't done, in other words, with Iran. Past Iran are more challenges, even bigger than Iran.
Yeah, and let me just, one point of concern, and I'm not sure how. There are two ways to look at it. The U.S. virtual embassy, because we don't actually have an embassy in Tehran, but we got a virtual embassy, has just yesterday issued a warning for Americans to basically get the hell out of Iran. Well, the only time you do that is if you anticipate you're going to launch a military strike. What I don't know is if it's a good, serious indicator that they are going to strike, or if it's just another psychological operation to create that impression. Now, from the Iranian standpoint, I think they've entered these talks this time with the United States with their eyes wide open. They were naive.
With toothpicks.
Say what?
With toothpicks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they were naive last June. June 12th, June 13th, they thought they were getting ready to go in to have talks with the United States and Israel with U.S. full knowledge and support, carried out that surprise attack that tried to decapitate their military and political and religious leadership. Well, that's like the banana in the tailpipe scene from Beverly Hills Cop. When Eddie Murphy stuffs the banana in the tailpipe, he prevents the car that's following him from operating. But then the second time, the cop said, "We're not going to fall for that banana in the tailpipe trick again." That's Iran. They're not going to fall for this. We're going to suck you in with negotiations, and then we're going to sucker punch you. But the word, Iran's made it clear. I just saw a headline. They're not giving up enrichment. Okay, that's their negotiating position is, yeah, you can inspect our facilities, but we're not giving up enrichment, and we're certainly not talking about support for Hamas and cutting off support for Hamas and Hezbollah and eliminating our missile force. So, Trump can have a deal, but I don't see how he overcomes the objections of the neocons and Zionists that surround him. So I think he's still. I don't think he's driving the ship.
Carl, do you think that Israel would use a nuclear bomb? You remember they have done something before all of these sort of talks happening. We've seen something happening near Dimona, or some sort of earthquake, some sort of, the seismograph showed something has happened in Israel. What was that? Do you think could be one of the reasons that Israel may use nuclear weapons against Iran, nuclear bomb against Iran?
I've heard from, I think, competent authority that it was a genuine seismic event and that Israel took advantage of it by, propagandizing it as a, third tier propaganda. as a possible test of a nuclear weapon or whatever. I believe that. At the same time, I went back and looked at 1948 forward, and I looked at the Joint Staff's analysis of many of the occasions when Israel not necessarily involved itself in a conflict, but was on the verge of doing it or did. And I looked at what happened with regard to speculation about, and then I think confirmation of actual movement of nuclear weapons. And I have no doubt in my mind that they have thought about it in the past, and beyond just an ostentatious example of what they could do, denied, of course, to Washington, but in one occasion at least known by Washington and not objected to, at least not in terms of its propaganda effect. Maybe the actual movement was objected to. I can't tell from the record. But all to say, I don't think Netanyahu would hesitate in a heartbeat if he thought Israel was going down or was on the verge of going down, use a nuclear weapon. That's the reason I said many moons ago, Iran made a mistake. It should have developed a nuclear weapon. In the military professional mind, it should have that deterrent.
Larry, you've mentioned the case of negotiations before the war happening between Iran and Israel. Not only the negotiations, somehow failed because of the Israeli attack on Iran, but in the aftermath, we saw how the Trump administration did everything. Before coming to this live, we were talking about what has happened in Iran and what is the main reason of these sort of protests in Iran. Here is what Scott Bessent said just yesterday about the role of the United States in the whole situation.
What we have done is created a dollar shortage in the country. At a speech at the Economic Club of New York in March, I outlined the strategy. It came to a swift and I would say grand culmination in December when one of the largest banks in Iran went under. There was a run on the bank. The central bank had to print money. The Iranian currency went into free fall, inflation exploded, and hence we have seen the Iranian people out on the street. We will continue monitoring all the partners, all the Iranian partners. The good news, Senator, is that we have seen, and we can see it with our fencing.
Yeah.
He says that the same way Madeleine Albright responded to 500,000 Iraqi children dying from our sanctions during the 20 years of them. He's a jerk.
Yeah. No, he is a despicable human being in my view. And what he's admitted to is the United States has committed an act of war against Iran.
Yep.
We're the aggressor. We keep pushing this lie that Iran is this big sponsor of terrorism. And they sponsor terrorism for Hamas and Hezbollah. And yet, go look at the number of, quote, attacks attributed to Hamas and Hezbollah over the last 20 years. I've written about this extensively because the Israeli Foreign Ministry publishes a database. And the total number of attacks are like 700, and the total deaths around 1,500. So I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's certainly not this global, massive threat that's being presented, particularly when you consider the fact that the United States, because we supported and enabled Saddam Hussein to start a war with Iran back in 1980, and that war culminated in the deaths of at least 500,000 Iranian soldiers, and I don't know how many civilians. But the United States has got so much blood on its hands, and yet we're constantly out accusing Iran of doing the very things that we have done. And we feel, and we like to sing, we're proud to be an American. When in fact we are the only thing we've proven really good at over the last 60 years is killing civilians.
That brings back a thought, Nima. one time we were in the Fort Myers Ceremonial Hall, and we were practicing for an event that was going to be pretty big, going to be horses and everything, you know. And Lee Greenfield was up, and he was rehearsing that song. And Powell turned around and walked out. And I went outside the ceremonial hall. I said, "Boss, something turned you off?" He said, "Yeah, Lee Greenfield." He hated that song. He hated that song.
Yeah,
Never asked him the real reason, but I suspected it was the other side of Colin Powell. After all, he'd been National Security Advisor to the most competent intelligence official in the U.S. structure at a high level, George H.W. Bush. He'd been very close to him, and he knew some of the heinous things that we had done, from Iran-Contra to you name it.
Larry, you've mentioned the talk I had with Alex Craner, in those part of us that is somehow hopeful about Donald Trump. There are people in our audience, there are people everywhere that they think that Donald Trump is somehow has some sort of agenda in the background of his mind. And I don't know if we can see that by this, here is what J.D. Vance said about the agenda. What is the main reason of this buildup, this sort of movement of weapons to the region, to the West Asia on the part of the Trump administration? Here is what Vance said.
To conduct diplomacy with, when you can't even talk to the person who's in charge of the country, that makes all of this much more complicated. And it makes the whole situation much more absurd. Like, he can pick up the phone and call Putin. He can pick up the phone and call Xi. Even countries that we have very hostile relations with, he can pick up the phone. North Korea. He met the guy at the 38th parallel. It is bizarre that we can't just talk to the actual leadership of a country. It makes diplomacy very, very difficult.
Wonder why we can't talk to them.
Yeah, we've been carrying out acts of war against Iran for 46 years, and when you step back and look at the carnage that we have helped inflict on Iran through proxies, the deaths, it's probably total close to 1 million people. Go to any of the AI search engines and ask, how many civilians American civilians has Iran killed since 1979? And the numbers the answers go between 0 and 50. Okay? 0 and 50. But when you look at the numbers that we've killed, hundreds of thousands. And then we wonder, why do they chant death to America? You know what? America just refuses to look in the mirror and realize that we are the murderer. That's why I've been using the movie reference, this movie called Angel Heart. And Robert De Niro played a character named Lucifer. And he hires this guy. I want you to find this killer. And Mickey Rourke is the detective to find the killer. And it's only at the very end that it realizes he's the killer. He's just looking for himself. That's what we in the United States, we need to look in the mirror and realize we are not a force for good in the world. We're a force for evil, for death, for destruction. I mean, hell, we've been facilitating child pornography, facilitating pedophilia, letting these very wealthy, entitled people go. I mean, look at Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots. He's in the Epstein list. And, and we've got actual other evidence where he got picked up south of Jacksonville, Florida, in an Asian massage parlor. I mean, a billionaire. You think a guy like that would have better judgment than engaging in such conduct. And did he get punished? Oh, hell no, he got a walk. He'll be at the Super Bowl this weekend. This this demonization of Iran is completely unjustified. We keep talking about the threat they pose to the region. They're not the ones attacking other countries. I mean, for God's sake, the United States has invaded Iraq twice, and we've helped stir up the civil war, armed and equipped that civil war in Syria, and also invaded Afghanistan. Gee, Iraq and Afghanistan on both sides of Iran. I mean, it just, I get so frustrated with it. I become unintelligible.
Just to add to that, in the bloodiest war since World War I, in its own composite way, the Iran-Iraq War, when Iran was making progress on the battlefield that Saddam Hussein thought was just too much for him, we gave him the chemicals to use chemical weapons against Iran. We gave him the precursors as a minimum, and I think we actually gave him some weapons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Carl and Larry, for being with us today. This is the last podcast from Iran, and see you next time in Brazil.
In Brazil, yeah. All right, you have a safe travel. I know it's a long trip, and with those kids,
Yeah.
it's like a survival journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Have safe travels.
Thank you. See you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.